This is a clutch lever, and it's fundamental on a traditional geared motorcycle for smooth and safe operation. What it allows you to do is regulate the power delivery between the engine and the gearbox. And for us as motorcyclists, it pretty much becomes second nature once you learn to ride. Now, manufacturers have been trying for years to come up with a solution to do away with this thing, and we've got 3 of the latest options on the marketplace available to test today. So what we want to know is which is the best one of those systems, and does it make this redundant? First up, we've got the Honda Africa Twin Adventure Sports DCT. Now, Honda, amongst these manufacturers, are pretty much the pioneer of a clutchless auto system. They introduced the DCT back in 2010 on the VFR 1200. Now, the Africa Twin comes in at £17,799, making it the cheapest bike on test, but it's also the least powerful with 100 brake horsepower. At 253 kilos, it's pretty much on a par with the others. Now, the DCT system has 2 separate hydraulic clutch packs. One works on even number gears and one works on odd. Basically, the second one gets the next gear spinning while the first gear is engaged, and that makes the shift between the 2 gears pretty much seamless. It does add 11 kilos to the overall weight and 1,300 quid to the price. Next up, we've got the BMW R1300GS TE ASA, and this was introduced for the 2025 model year, so that's making it pretty much bang up to date. It's a 1300cc flat twin, typical BMW, 143 horsepower, and comes in at 237 kilos. Now, the system is completely different on the BMW. It uses 2 electromechanical actuators. Basically, that's 1 lever for the clutch and 1 for the gear selection that operate automatically from the ECU, the TCU, and the IMU. The clutch has hydraulic system for physical operation with an actuator engaging, disengaging and controlling the slip. It comes as part of the dynamic package, which is roughly £1,710, and that includes DSA, Riding Mode Pro and various other features. It adds 3 kilos in total to the bike's overall weight. And rounding off our trio, we've got the 2026 KTM 1390 Super Adventure S Evo, a brand new model for this year. Now, these retail at $18,699, puts out 173 horsepower and weighs in at 227 kilos, but that's the dry weight without fuel. Now, it's the simplest system here on test because what KTM have done is taken the standard gearbox and given it a centrifugal clutch and an auto shifter. What that means is, as you wind on the throttle, the clutch plates engage, and when you shift, it uses KTM's Quick Shifter Plus technology to bang between the gears in just 50 milliseconds. It adds 1 kilo to the overall weight, 10mm extra width to the clutch cover, and 1,700 quid to the price over the standard S model. Now, because all these systems are completely different, we're really focusing on those rather than on the actual bikes, although of course performance and everything else is hugely important. But our way to test these is to start off slow and build up speed. So we're going to do some slow control stuff, we're going to look at pillions, and we're going to build up to sticking them in manual mode and having some fun. So for our first challenge, we're going to go back to basics, and I'm going to put my glamorous assistant, Mr. Simon Hargreaves here, through the figure of 8, the test that you have to do on both Mod 1 and on CBT that really sorts the men from the boys. So Simon, when you're ready, start your engine.
Okay, here we go.
And around me. So next up, we've got the BMW R1300GS TE ASA. So Simon, you know where you're going now. So in your own time, away you go.
This is not so easy, this one.
This is the KTM 1390 Super Adventure S Evo. Simon, when you're ready,
Okay.
do your stuff.
It's easier the first time.
So the big question is, which one of these is the best at doing a figure of 8?
This particular test, I have to say, it was the Africa Twin.
Excellent.
That was the one that was the smoothest and it was the easiest to ride. I think second was probably the KTM. And then the hardest one to control was the BMW, as I say, because the brake was too grabby. But I've got to say, the Honda was the best balanced, which surprises me, but it was.
Yeah, not what I expected either,
No.
but there you have it. Okay, so on to our next challenge. So for our next challenge, we want to know how well these systems cope with a Pillion on board. And to do that, we've brought in the services of MCN's Charlotte King to give an opinion from the back seat. So Simon, when you're ready, start your engines and away you go.
Oh, nice smooth fill away. Quite a comfy seat. Definitely the easiest one to get off. Good.
Now all of these bikes are flagship adventure touring machines, and when you're loaded up with a Pillion and luggage, that's when you want your gear changes to be really smooth, and doing this test will really highlight the differences between these systems, if there are any. So you've had a chance now to test all three different systems.
Yeah.
Which one of these would be the one that you'd choose?
I think the BMW comes out on top. This will be a close second. The seat is the least comfortable of the three, but the riding position is nice, and the suspension on this was noticeably the most comfortable. Over the little hump bridge, I didn't even have to hold on. You wouldn't get launched out of the seat. But the BMW seat is that much more comfortable. The foot pegs are that much more chunky. You don't feel like you're going to slip off the foot pegs. And having the heated seat on the BMW, I think would be a lovely luxury on a day like today.
And is that still the smoothest for pulling away and for gear changes?
I would say it's probably actually one of the least smooth for pulling away because of the power of the engine and how it puts it down. But gear changes, I think that one's the smoothest.
Okay, so purely focusing on the automatic transmission side of it and the gear changes, you're still going to go with the BMW as being the smoothest of the three?
I think so. And I think as a Pillion, just the position was the best. But I think, yeah, so long as you had that luggage on the back, so you were safe and you weren't holding on for dear life. I think the general feel of that bike felt very deliberate as well. It felt like you could have a lot of fun on it.
So you've been Pillion on manual bikes in the past.
Yeah.
You've now been Pillion on three of the latest auto bikes. Which do you prefer?
I think being a Pillion on a manual, depending on the rider. But the manual, I think it just gives you that much more control. Like when we're doing the U-turns, there was a couple of occasions where you're thinking, I think the gearbox has done something here that Simon perhaps wasn't expecting it to. And if you're on a long trip and you're getting tired, I think if you've been someone that's ridden a manual bike a long time, it's muscle memory to you. Whereas on a bike like this, it's doing the work for you. And if it makes the wrong decision, that could put you in a really sticky position. Which as a Pillion is even worse, because you're just going to fall on the floor and not know what happened.
I think that's a really good point. Well, thank you very much for that, and I think it's time we moved on to the next challenge. There's a common preconception that autos aren't particularly sporty, that they're slow to react off the throttle, a bit laggy when you really want to crack on. So we've relocated to the North Yorkshire Moors, where it's very wild and windy today, just to see how well they react to a 40 to 60 mile an hour roll-on, such as when you're going for an overtake. So we've still got the bikes in auto mode to carry out this test, and that's letting the electronics decide what gear it's sitting in at 40 mile an hour before we slam the throttle open for the overtake. Now, all of them were quite happy to sit in fourth gear for this, and that's great because it gives us a baseline that we can actually get some good results from. Now, the BMW comes out bottom of the pile simply because of how long it takes to change gear. As you slam open the throttle on the BMW, it's almost like the bolt action of a rifle. There's a clunk clunk as it changes gear and just a bit of a delay. Doesn't lose too much momentum, but it just takes that kind of split second to drop down a gear. In second place is the Honda. Now, we already know that that's got its plate spinning to shift to the next gear. And when we're in fourth and it's just dropping down a gear, it's not too much of a problem at all. It's virtually seamless and you barely feel it actually change. It's only the fact that you get the grunt and the engine note change that you know it's slipped into the next gear. It is worth pointing out though that if it's in a higher gear and has to drop down more than one to be in the most effective gear, there is a delay that's almost like the clutch slipping that's a little bit disconcerting, but that is the nature of having those twin clutch systems. And that's where the KTM really has the edge. Because its system is so simple and it's basically just relying on KTM's quick shifter technology, slamming the throttle open, bangs it down a gear, and you're pretty much gone. It is quite a ferocious change on the KTM. It is worth pointing that out. That if you are, again, like the Honda, if you're in a higher gear, such as when you're on the motorway, a car moves out from in front of you and you slam on the gear, it does briefly lose momentum for a moment. That can be a bit of a shudder, but generally when it's an overtake on B roads, such as on this test, the KTM explodes into action far quicker than the other two can. So we've experienced all of these bikes in auto mode and they've performed really well, but ultimately motorcycling needs to be fun. So what we're going to do now is we're going to shift them into manual and just see how much they're going to make us smile. So what does putting these bikes into manual actually mean? Well, it takes a decision away from the internal sensors on the motorcycle and places it firmly in the hands of the rider as to what gear you want to be in. Now, there are different options on the bikes as to how you actually do this. The BMW has a traditional gear lever by your left foot, pretty much as you'd expect from any regular manual motorcycle. The Honda has paddles on the left-hand switchgear. The KTM has both paddles on the switchgear and a foot lever, and it has the ability to drop down a gear when you snap the throttle either closed or open. Because it has so many options and the sheer speed at which it can change gear, the KTM wins this part of the test hands down. Whether you're snapping the throttle closed, banging down on the gear lever, or hammering through the paddles, it reacts so quickly that it doesn't take anything away from the riding experience. It's a far closer run thing between the BMW and the Honda though, but the BMW does just edge it, simply because when you are doing downshifts and banging through the box, there's a little bit of resistance on that gear lever under your foot that gives it that mechanical feel like a traditional system. The Honda is the least exciting, and that's because there's so much going on in that system. Oddly, the paddles on the Honda are the opposite way round to the KTM, and it kind of makes less sense to me. When you're on the KTM, it's your thumb that's going for the upshift and your index finger that's shifting down. It's the other way round on the Honda, and it's a less natural feeling, and that takes a little bit away from it. You can have a foot shift for £389 extra on the Honda, and that may well make the difference, but as it stands, that comes in at third place. With our test complete and the heavens now opening, we can retreat to a nearby abbey and consider our verdict. And that brings us to the end of our test. And what we really need to do now is come up with a conclusion as to which bike has the best system. Unfortunately, it's not as clear cut as it could be because they are all excellent performers. And as auto bikes with an auto clutch, they all perform really well. But of course, we do need to have some kind of pecking order in this. And rolling in third place, we're going to have the Africa Twin DCT. The simple reason being is that there's such a disconnect between the throttle, the controls and the engine. Because it's got that twin clutch system, it loses quite a bit of feel and quite a bit of that experience of riding a motorcycle. Between the other two, it's actually even closer, and it's really, really difficult to pick a winner. However, we do have one. The GS, slick though the system is, refined though the system is, smooth though the system is, again, it just doesn't quite have enough to keep you involved. It works better in manual mode than it does in automatic. In automatic, you're still almost arguing with it yourself when it changes gear. It's like, oh, I wouldn't have changed gear there. And it does take a little bit away from it, but the way it delivers drive off of the throttle is very, very slick indeed, as you would expect from the GS. I mean, the model itself has been developed for God knows how many years, and there's no surprise that BMW's technicians have got that as smooth as possible. But as I say, there is still a little bit of a disconnect where it's not as involving as me personally would like it. And that brings us to the KTM. Now, the reason this one comes out as the winner is because it's the one that you feel most connected to. The system is the simplest system, having that centrifugal clutch. You know, it's worked in the Honda Cub, the step through, the world's best-selling motorcycle has had that centrifugal clutch its whole life, and that really works well. And apart from that, all you've got is the auto shifter that changes gear for you, which is just pretty much like a quick shifter. Now, the electronics in this, the algorithms are so good that it basically changes gear where I would. The harder you ride it, the more you get on the gas, the longer it hangs onto gears. If you ride it gently, it will change gears sooner, and it's just so adaptable in all those conditions. Now, the auto is really good on it, but the manual is really what takes this to the top of the pack of these three. Having all those options and the electronics and that direct connection you feel with the engine brings this one out on top for me. And that takes us right back to the very start and the question we asked about whether the clutch lever was redundant. The systems on these bikes will appeal to people. There are people out there who will find that a hand shift or an auto clutch is going to work for them in the type of riding that they do and what they need from a motorcycle. However, for me personally, I'm really not ready to give up that clutch lever yet because of that connection that gives me to the motorcycle and to the engine. So we hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Leave a comment if you want. And me, I'm off to find my clutch lever.